Hello, I'm Dr. Ryan Anderson. I'm one of the co-founders of Telos U. This webinar is designed to teach you about the pyramid of influence. Throughout the process of Telos, we're going to be teaching you a lot of different tools, a lot of different strategies, a lot of different perspectives. But there are some ideas that underlie all of those and that help guide us towards how we can help make those effective or to help us understand when our efforts to be helpful are not working, what we can do to help get them unstuck. So, the ideas we'll be talking about today were originally discussed and written about by the Arbinger Institute. In particular, they're discussed a great deal in the book, The Anatomy of Peace, which is something we encourage all Telos families to read. It's something that we've been applying from the very beginning at Telos, and we've been building upon those ideas in the way that we approach things. So today we'll talk to you about the original Arbinger model, and then we'll show a couple of ways that we have learned and expanded upon it in the work that we're doing here at Telos. But a lot of our focus is going to be how you, as a parent, can learn and apply these principles because we have found them to be absolutely indispensable in helping things go right and encouraging growth and progress for your child while they're with us here at Telos. So, one of the things that we need to think about is this idea that none of us can make your child grow, change, overcome fears. None of us can make decisions for them. But we all have the ability to be a great deal of influence upon the child. And that can be positive, that can be negative, that can be neutral. There are multiple forces that are working in their lives at all points in time. And we need to recognize that your child has run into a variety of forces and factors that have led them to get stuck and to struggle. And it's important to recognize that in coming to Telos, simply arriving at the door and walking through it doesn't mean that they're just going to stop having their moments of being stuck, that their struggles are just going to go away. They will continue to have those experiences, and we will work with them in real time and we will show progress over time in them getting to growing. And that progress will have its ups, that progress will have its downs. There is a little bit of a roller coaster ride to the process. Understanding that helps us stick with it when we're going through some of the downward parts of the roller coaster. But it's also important to recognize throughout that whole process, there are things that we can do together, working with you and us, that become these stabilizing forces and help things move forward and get better. In a lot of ways, what we're trying to do together with you is analogous to the way an airfoil works on the wing of an aircraft. There's going to be winds that are going to be blowing because of the velocity of your child. If we work together to shape our influence, we can create lift with that velocity rather than having it be something that just buffets us and your child or leads to things spiraling out of control. So we do need to recognize sometimes things will go wrong, and our response to how things go wrong is critical. But even more important is knowing how we can use our influence at all times to help things go right. And if we're doing a good job of doing that, putting most of our time and energy into helping things go right, we will find that when the time comes to correct things when they go wrong, we will be much more effective. And your child will be much more likely to be open and responsive to our efforts. So that's why these ideas are so important. So, again, the two major objectives of the things you'll be learning about today in the pyramid of influence are how to use your influence to help things go right, and also how to improve and build upon your effectiveness for intervening and interacting with your child when things go wrong. But again, the most important part is to put most of our time and energy into helping things go right, to not be complacent about those things. So, what you see before you here is something that was designed and discovered and built upon by the Arbinger Institute. It goes by a couple of different names. It's been called the Parenting Pyramid, the Pyramid of Influence, the Peacemaking Pyramid. but the principles behind it are the same regardless of which name we refer to it. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is we start at the bottom of the period with a broad base and work towards the top with a relatively narrow point. The idea that's being expressed is that each of these is showing the amount of time and energy we should be investing into different parts of the pyramid to help things go right. And you'll notice that at the bottom, most of our time and energy is worked into improving, monitoring, building upon our way of being, building relationships with others, etc. And at the top, there's only a small amount of correction. I think a lot of us coming into telos would say, boy, it feels like I spend a whole lot more time in correction. And that's pretty natural. A lot of times, the crisis that comes from our children struggling pushes us in that direction. And one of the things we want to talk about is how to work our way out of that trap. So each one of these levels builds upon the other. So, as you see here, lesson number one is we should spend most of our time and effort in the lower levels of the pyramid. That helps to prevent the need for correction, but also allows us to have the sort of relationship we need to have, the sort of connection, the sort of trust and safety between us and our child when the time comes to correct. The second lesson is that whenever we're struggling, it's an important point to look at where we currently are on the pyramid. Are we trying to correct and that correction doesn't seem to be working? Are we trying to teach but there's no openness to our teaching? Are we trying to listen to them but they won't talk to us? Are we trying to build a relationship with them but they're keeping us at a distance? Are we trying to build relationships with others who are important to them but we're finding we're not getting very far and there's not an openness? At each one of these layers, it's important to say, where are we? And to learn that most of the time, if that's not working, we need to go at least one layer deeper into the pyramid. But also, I found it's useful to reevaluate all of our levels underneath. Because if we're struggling at listening and learning, then there probably is some kind of a challenge with building the relationship with others who have influence, or getting out of the box that's impeding our ability to listen to them and to learn from them, whatever it may be. And so a lot of times you may say, okay, well, I'm correcting. That's kind of our natural impulse to correct when things go wrong. The child, didn't get their homework, didn't go to school, ended up keeping their technology and disobeying the boundaries and the standards that are in place for that. And the most natural thing for us to do is to correct. But what the pyramid of influence would say is we need to at least start one layer lower. And especially what I like to do is kind of make sure that I go all the way down and at the very least start at listen and learn to try to understand what were they experiencing? What were the thoughts, the feelings, the things they were going through? What was going on that made this something that they felt was their best option and the way they were going to handle things at the moment. And of course, my ability to ask them to share those things with me depends greatly on the amount of trust in the relationship that we have. And so one of the things we need to recognize is that's where lesson number three comes from, is ultimately our effectiveness at each level of the pyramid depends on the levels below it, but especially that lowest level, way of being. Now we have three different trainings, three different webinars on the idea of way of being. They're the getting out of the box webinars. That idea is so important that we wanted to have a more extensive webinar training series for you to go with. So we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about what that looks like because we have put a lot of time and effort into that, and would encourage you to make sure you have watched and worked on those other webinars. So the next layer is building relationships with others who have influence. So one of the things you want to be aware of is, who does your child trust? Who do they connect with? Is it certain peers? Are there certain staff that they have here at Telos? Do they feel trust in their therapist? Do they really love the other parent, but you and the other parent have a rocky relationship? One of the things that can be really problematic is that if we are putting ourselves as adversaries for other people that have a relationship with our children, or if we are distant and detached and we're not connected, first of all, that's going to help our child feel more distant. Any degree of adversarial feelings we have towards people they care deeply about, they feel connected to, is going to feel like an adversarial connection towards them. And of course, this is tricky. Sometimes our children may have friends where we worry about their attitudes, their actions, or where we can look and say, I think I do have to draw a barrier about my child connecting with this particular friend because this person is struggling enough, they're in enough trouble in their lives that if my child's going to spend time with them, they're going to be right there with them. When we do need to build boundaries around friends like that, it's important that we don't express contempt or condemnation, that we look upon their struggles and we recognize that they're a work in progress as well. But that doesn't mean that we don't have boundaries, but everywhere we can, work on building those relationships. And this is particularly important while you're working with us here at Telos. One of the advantages we have as Telos staff is that we don't have a history with your child. Now, that's a little bit difficult because it means that we don't know them as well as you do, but it also means that all of those years of struggles and disagreements and butting heads and all of those kinds of things, we don't have that with them. And so we have the ability to build relationships that are more in the here and now. And so it's very important as we work together with you that we develop trust, that we develop a really good working relationship. And when it comes to co-parenting, there are lots of ways in which it's easy to have points of tension, disagreements about parenting approaches, or even deep personal hurt that comes with divorce and other things like that. What we need to take a look at is that that division means that if there's conflict between people that the child has a relationship with, all of our ability to work effectively is decreased. So we have to take a look and explore where we can build a relationship in some way so that the child that we're working with, the young adult child that's with us here, is feeling that there's not a battlefield between people they care about, that they can at least be united around the best interest of that young adult child, and that there's not easy opportunities for dividing and conquering. And as we build relationships with other people who are influential with your child, that makes it a lot easier to build your relationship with the child. Now, we could spend an awful lot of time talking about what building a relationship looks like. Some of it has to do with understanding how your child feels loved. What is their way of understanding it? There's lots of different ways. We all have our own love maps. And if that's something you feel like you don't really understand, well, there's a couple of family therapy sessions right there to explore what helps them feel loved. How do they feel validated? How do they know that you're on their side, that you're aligned with them? What are the things you do to recognize the good in them, to build them up? How do you spend time together in ways that are fun? I know that can be a little bit harder to do at a distance, but there's still a need to connect, to share, and to let your own humanity show through and connect with your child. This is immensely important, especially if they're going to work with us and with you on the things that are most vulnerable to them. So, as a part of building the relationship with the child, you need to be present. You need to be stable. You need to be regulated. You need to be owning your side and managing your stuff and working on the things that are hard for you and not putting the weight of any of that on your child. And what that does is that allows you to open up space for the existence of your child as the human being that they currently are, and also opens up breathing space for your child to be able to grow and adapt and learn. That's why this is so important. So if you're not sure what you can be doing on a day by day, week by week basis to work on building the relationship with others who are influential with your child or building your relationship directly with your child. And that's something I would bring back to your therapist and talk about. Make sure you're actively working on those things. The next is learning to listen and learn from your child. Now, one of the things that's very important is we have to go into listening to your child with your spell check and your grammar check turned off. And I'm not just talking about the way that they talk, but when you think about the way your worldview was when you were 19, 20, 21, 22, chances are it has grown quite a bit and evolved quite a bit since that point in time. You and I should not expect that their worldview has matured to where our worldview is. But if we're going to work with them, we have to step into their world. And in so doing, we can help their world evolve. But we have to start with their world the way their world is today. And they have to see our willingness to do that entirely. And where we don't have a shared experience, where we have a different set of feelings, what we need to do in the process of listening and learning is not trying to tell ourselves, well, this is why they're wrong. The question we need to be asking about is, how does this make sense? Because it does. If you understand their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences, their disappointments, their dreams, their struggles, everything they're doing, including the maladaptive, self destructive things, all makes sense. And we need to approach that with an open mind and an open heart to learn and understand. And that openness to learning their world is a huge piece of what will help them feel open to us when we're trying to share different perspectives, trying to evolve their understanding or guide them in certain ways. Our openness to listen and learn is the most powerful invitation we have to them to invite their openness to our teaching and our communicating. Now, interestingly enough, Terry Warner, one of the members of the Arbinger Group, said there's lots of reasons people struggle. Sometimes it's a lack of knowledge. They just don't know. They haven't had the experiences, they haven't gained the information that would guide them to feel like they can do something better. So, in teaching and communicating, we have an opportunity to share information or to help them discover information, even better if we help them through the process rather than just imparting it. Terry Warner also said the second reason that people struggle is that sometimes they lack the skills. They may know that there's something better, but they lack knowing how to do it, or they don't feel confident or competent in doing it. If we want our children to be able to be willing to try things that they don't feel competent or confident in, we have to create a great deal of safety. And again, that comes through listening and learning. But we also need to teach in a way that they can learn and understand and mentor. He said the third reason is resistance. And that can be okay, they know what to do, they can do it, but they're running into emotional reasons that lead them not to. We don't resolve emotional reasons by just teaching, and we certainly don't resolve emotional reasons by correcting. This is one of the reasons why when we're saying, okay, they I can see they know what to do, I can see they're capable of doing it, and they're just not doing it. That's when we need to go further down that pyramid and listen and learn again and make sure the relationship is strong enough to learn, okay, what are they experiencing that's leading to that resistance? And at the very top is correcting. Now, correcting, when it's done well, is a lot more like laser surgery than it is like open heart surgery. When we're correcting, we need to be specific, focused. Okay, here's the struggle. Here's the problem. This is the principle that's being violated. This is why this is an issue. This is what I want to encourage or teach to do. And so there may be principle-based consequences. There may be ways that we're trying to help them learn. One thing I want to be very clear about is correction is not about punishment. It's not about making them suffer so that they regret having made bad decisions so they supposedly don't make those decisions again. If there's one thing we've learned, that a focus on punishment, first of all, develops resistance. It destroys that relationship. It just kind of decimates that base of the pyramid, when what we're doing is intended to punish, to make them irritated, to make their life harder, to make them experience discomfort and suffering, to try to convince them to behave differently. Correction is about guidance, boundaries, direction, encouragement, and it's not intended to make them suffer. Good correction helps them have experiences that help them see things differently, that provide the opportunity to feel differently, that help them have successes that they wouldn't have on their own, that would become motivating for them. It's a very different approach than punishment. One of the things that we'll often do here at Telos is we will use principle-based consequences. We'll think about the idea of, well, what was the principle that was violated? What about that principle do they not seem to be understanding or connecting with emotionally? What kind of an experience can we help create for them that can give them opportunities to connect with those? Where has harm been done? What do they need to do to correct the harm? So it's always going back to the experience itself rather than trying to punish. And we'll talk a lot about this idea of principle-based consequences and ways to teach effectively in some other webinars and in some therapy that you'll be doing. But again, correction should be done from the position of someone who is not harsh, who is not punitive, who is not demanding or rejecting. It's with firm boundaries. It's still maintaining our composure. It's being focused on what the problem was rather than pulling in all the other problems or letting the anxiety about everything that could happen wrong in the future if this doesn't get changed. We focus on the issue, the principle, and teaching and helping the student move forward. And if we're doing a really good job with the lower part of the pyramid, when we do that, they are much more likely to be open, to have emotional experiences that are positive and motivating from our efforts to correct, rather than placing a wider divide between us and them. Now at Telos, we've used this in this pyramid of influence. You'll notice that we've matched up different Telos tools and strategies to different parts of the pyramid. So we know, okay, when we're in protecting and correcting, that's when we might use the authoritative approach or principle-based consequences or the different levels of accountability. When we're down at the bottom with a heart at peace and a way of being, we're working on our Teflon demeanor. We're being kind, we're being patient, we're being curious about things rather than being harsh about things. You'll notice we've collapsed the building relationship with the student and the building relationship with other people who are influential into one category, and we've added one more layer, which is the processing approach. Now, again, we have a whole other webinar on the processing approach, and it is such an important piece that the processing approach underlies everything that we do here. So you'll notice here that we're saying if you're having a hard time listening and learning, teaching, consulting, protecting, correcting, one of the things we really need to think about is how well are we understanding their processing issues and utilizing that processing approach, keeping things slow, simple, clear, being mindful of how full their sensory funnel is and working with those pieces, being flexible and understanding, but also consistent and predictable in our structure and in our values. Working to simplify things, break things down to one step at a time, being supportive, and working on teaching skills using a scaffolding approach. So the one thing that we want you to really consider all along the way is what can we do to help you become more confident in spending most of your time and energy in the lower levels of the pyramid? How can we help you learn to connect the right skills and approaches? And how can we then use that when the time comes for you to protect, correct, or draw boundaries with your child, that can be much more effective with them. So what you see here is an overview of almost everything you'll be learning at Telos. Don't worry if this image feels a little confusing. Again, the most important part is this: recognizing how can I spend more time working at the bottom of the pyramid. So I encourage you to go back to your therapist to talk to them about this concept, to explore where you tend to spend time, and to make some specific plans to be proactive about what you can do to increase your efforts in the bottom of the pyramid. And from all the experience we've had, we can speak confidently in saying that you will find that this will significantly increase your ability to be a positive influence and a moving factor in your child's progress here at Telos and beyond.